theme in the book
Uh-huh.
is breaking out of silos.
Right.
Yeah, the remix is
Hello and welcome to Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank midweek mini-series, the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast based on the book of the same name by my chum Liz High and her co-author Alison Netzer. I hope you're having a good week. Regular listeners, do not adjust your sets. Yes, it's Wednesday. Happy hump day, and we'll be back as normal on Saturday. In a moment, you'll hear from Liz, an Insight Ninja, marketing strategy speaker and author who has worked with some amazing brands and more recently has focused on supporting fintechs, banks and credit unions to embrace brand thinking and has written a book about it. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm no rockstar, but a seasoned B2B tech CMO with a marketing book buying problem. And don't be deterred by not a bank in the title, as I'll be on hand as there's plenty that other marketers can learn from the research and insights found in this book. Speaking of which, Liz's book describes 5 principles. Last week we talked about the second of those, embrace tension and create contradictions. And this week, rather appropriately for a show called Rockstar, we focus on number 3, cue the remix. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back.
After this word.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Welcome back, Liz, to Rockstar CMO, Think Like a Brand mini-series based on your book, Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm getting my coffee quotient up for the day, so feeling gradually better.
Splendid. Always good, isn't it? A bit of coffee, because I'm talking to you from the UK and you're in Seattle, so it's earlier in the morning for you than it is for me. So this week, we're on number 4 of our little mini series. This week we're going to talk about your third principle from the book, Cue the Remix. I love the titles of your different principles. They're cool. And Cue the Remix is excellent for a Rockstar CMO. So why should we cue the remix, Liz?
So I think I've talked a little bit about it. One of my personal fears as someone who's worked in innovation and CX design, across the years is when I'm suddenly faced by a completely blank sheet of paper. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of mythology in every industry that innovation has to be 100% blue sky and, you need to rip everything up and start all over again.
Yeah.
Cue the remix is the antidote to that.
Right. So you're suggesting that we start with something we already have.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think we talked in the last episode about stopping when you get to a yes, but that most banks have never traditionally done that. There's, add more and more and offer more and more.
Yeah.
So the idea behind Cue the Remix is to make a virtue out of that.
Right.
So if you've got a lot of products, a lot of experiences, what else can you do with them?
Right. And are you saying that we're remixing in order to bring new services and products and stuff to the audience? Or are we saying we're going to kind of bring this stuff together and reduce the complexity?
Yeah, it's bringing things together. Yeah.
Right.
And the example that I'll use here is the gig economy. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Depending on, whose numbers you believe, it's going to be nearly a $500 billion kind of sector by kind of end of next year. That, as we go into recession, gig work tends to kind of go up. So, we're likely to see maybe those figures grow even further. And we're getting to a point where pretty much everyone at some point in their career will have had a gig role.
Right.
Now, if you go into traditional banks, and, I think we kind of have an example where if you go in, you say, I'd like to open an account. The first thing they'll say is that a business account or is that a personal account?
Right.
Now, if you're a gig worker, you're not really a business, but you've got business people's needs. And you're not really a retail because your standard retail account doesn't deliver what you need to do.
Right.
But the content, all the products, all the services, all of the compliance, all of the technology has already been built to meet that gig worker's needs, but it's just separated in the bank.
Right. So is some of this about the way you work operationally, about bringing these folks together? I mean, like last week we were talking about, there's a chief loan officer, for example, and they're going to look at everything as a loan. So is that the same thing where you're bringing together these different disciplines within the financial organization, thinking, how do I serve this particular new maybe persona, if we think about the gig economy kind of person?
Yeah, absolutely. And, as a regulated industry, it's not as easy as just bringing it all together. There's work to be done.
Yeah.
But in terms of any growth or any innovation, there is always work to be done.
Right. And in terms of, I mean, really the book is about, thinking like a brand, us brand building. How does that affect? I mean, does that confuse the brand? Are we bringing something new into the market, or is because last week you were talking about very much about the find the first yes and really focus. Does some of these remixes make things more complicated or simpler, do you think, for the audience?
There's two. I think a lot of it depends on the culture of the institution. And I think in my time working with Nimbus, you would find banks that were very comfortable with the idea of identifying a group of customers, building the services to deliver, and then creating a new brand, so a powered by brand.
Yes, yeah.
Where you're building the equity of your main brand, but you're creating something that's new and highly specific for the market.
Right. So it's a bit like the example we were using again last week, wasn't it? About new business. Same with your gig worker kind of example. So is that the way that you're seeing financial organizations work? Is they actually build something cool and niche and different, but it's actually a sub brand within their brand, and therefore they can. So for me, I can identify it as being. I think we used the word community last week. I identify this is for my community. This is for me. And I'm not bothered that it's by XYZ major high street bank powered by. And maybe that I feel good about that because it might mean, they won't go bust. But everything else about it is absolutely tuned to my needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's one of the tensions between banks and fintechs is that, the fintechs can do this really easily. And I'll talk about one in a minute called Move. But actually banks can do it as well. It just takes that innovator, in a role. So I'm going to tell a very quick story because it's one of my favorites. I worked with a very small community bank called Iroquois. I have all these banks with strange names. Iroquois Federal and Savings. And it was a bank that served for 100 odd years the rural community of Watsika, which is in Chicago, Illinois.
Right.
But the two leaders of that institution were very kind of pro-digital. They were focusing on building digital profiling. But they worked out, they had an unsuccessful launch of just a standard like Chime Compete, which didn't play well to their customers. So I worked with them to help develop a new brand called Hitched, which is a very modern brand, which is about young people when they first get married or move in together or engaged, where you have to have that money conversation. That's about how do we save for our wedding and future? How do we save for what's our next big goal? And, sometimes money's unequal. One person owns a house, one doesn't. One gets paid a lot, one doesn't. How do you bring that together so you've got shared savings goals? And Iroquois took that and they're now running a national brand.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
So the sub brand can outperform the main brand.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. That's interesting, especially if you find that community. And like you were saying, it's a broader community outside of where it is that you're originally serving. So you capture some zeitgeist of something that people are looking to do. And that's a good thing for also, I keep referring to last week, where you were saying, stop when you get to yes. Well, a lot of these high street banks, a lot of these large organizations have gone well beyond that, right? So how do they then retrench to a yes? It sounds like building a sub-brand is a good way of doing that.
I mean, I really believe in that. Yeah. Because it all comes back to, and you use the word persona. And I think it goes further than that now, which is what we were just talking about, the notion of a community. So a group of people with a shared problem. So let's say you let's go back to gig. So there's 2 or 3 out there now that are fintech first, using bank charters to kind of get out there. So there's Dave, which is doing amazingly. But the one that I think is super interesting is called Moves or Move Financial. And what they've done is they've very specifically said, okay, gig worker, yeah, that's great, but we're going even more specific. We're going to deal with the specific challenges of rideshare workers.
Right.
And I know because I've done work on a gig prop before, and really researching the challenges of the rideshare workers. It is, fronting my petrol. It's when business is slow, when I'm sick, when my car breaks down. So there's that whole thing about trading off cash advances. There's the whole thing around when I'm doing my expenses. How do I separate my personal money from my my work money? Now, what's personal petrol? What's work petrol? And then the third big thing that I found about them was they have this, as a group, a real entrepreneurial spirit. They're hustlers. Most people who are rideshare are doing 2 or 3 other things as well. They're in that real hustle economy. So what Moves has done is it's just nailed those 3 things perfectly. So they've got a debit card which you use and you kind of earn money back on, that allows you, once you've established your good behavior, you can get cash advances. So to cover all of those things. And then the really cool thing about it is that they've developed you can earn fractional stock in the company that you work for.
Right. Wow.
So what they're doing is based on, how much you use your card, the kind of points that you're developing with usage, great for the bank. All that kind of revenue coming in from every time they use the card. And then they're getting something back, which is ownership in the rideshare business that they work for.
Wow.
So it's a great example of nailing what matters.
And I love that, because I think from a content marketing perspective, or because I'm really here to try and apply some of these learnings from this book to other industries. I think that's really interesting, because it's very easy for us, let's say in B2B tech or in any place, it's just to focus on the needs that you immediately solve with your product or your service, right? And that's the narrow conversation I'm going to have with this audience. When in actual fact, like these guys have, they've discovered, well, actually, there's all these other adjacent challenges that my audience has, and I might be able to help with those too, right? So it gives people a much broader, and also I think when people start to trust you as a brand, they'll start to trust you with other problems that they have or other needs that they have, won't they? And they'll extend what they're doing to transact with you, because you've already demonstrated that trust.
No, I mean, I think that's really, it's interesting to me. And what it does is, once you've got that, you are part of that community. And that's what I talk about, rather than owning an audience, you're part of the community. Then as long as the important thing is that you do stay really aligned with what really fits in here. So,
that community
what's
thing.
the next extension?
That community thing keeps popping up in this conversation, doesn't it? Again, last week we were talking about that a lot. So how do we actually make this happen? I mean, it sounds to me like it's a classic customer-centric looking at their persona from a broader perspective, is that the sort of thing we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to, and again, we talked about it in the last episode as well, is look outside. Yeah. Right. One of the bits of advice that, we give in the book is for banks, credit unions, but it applies to everyone. Stop fighting the fintechs. Yeah. So look at what people are doing that are really successful, that are doing what you really wish you could do. And I bet if you looked at that, you could do it as well. It's a question of reorganizing and putting the work in to make the ingredients that you've got into the solution that's in the market.
Especially when you're such a part of the fabric of society, as in a financial institution, right? Is that we're all, whatever it is that we're doing, there's a financial element to it. So I really like that move thing where you're really focusing on that part of somebody's life and owning that's really interesting. All right, so as we have been getting into the habit of each of these things, I'm going to ask you, what are the 3 things you think that people need to take away from this?
Yeah. So I think number 1, and this is my co-author's, one of her favorite things that she told me all the time when we worked together was make the decisions smaller.
Right.
And part of the idea of starting with what have we got and how can we be creative with what we've got doesn't involve $1 million technology investment. It doesn't involve necessarily getting in a big team of consultants. Make your decisions smaller by looking at what you've got and then applying all of the creative thinking that's going to allow you to look at it differently. Looking outside, looking it up, coming back to, we talked about in the last episode, the guy from Umpqua going out and looking at the Ritz-Carlton. Look up, look forward, and then really think about what you can do differently with what you have. So that's
I like that, because some of the things you talk about are quite big things and seem to need big change and new brands and all that kind of stuff. But I like the idea of getting the decision smaller. So what's the second thing we should pick up from this?
So the second thing is, and a little bit, a big part of what the book is all about is that a lot of change can come from a mindset shift.
Right.
And this is going to sound really pedantic. If you go into a session asking yourself the question, what should we do? You're up there building new brands. You're up there blue sky thinking.
Yeah.
If you go in with the mindset, what could we do?
Right.
That's a very different way that you might approach what have we got? What's in the cupboard? What could we do differently?
Yeah.
Whereas I like most strategy work goes for the should, not the could.
And then I think also, like, reading the book and looking at the notes, like there's what can you do, like is the really conservative way. What should is like miles into the future. And then I like this, what could I do? How do I help them with what things I've got already, but I'm slightly thinking outside the box. I like that. So what's the third one?
So the third one, I think it really comes down to, and it's a recurring theme in the book, is breaking out of silos.
Right.
The remix is the classic example of kicking down silos.
Yeah.
So just because, and the example I use, and this is from a kind of a real client, they kind of worked on an idea for loyalty, that a lot of money was invested in creating the infrastructure, but it was on the retail side of the business.
Right.
But all the work that had been done here was totally applicable to finding the right group of small business that were really motivated by rewards and loyalty and returns.
Right.
But having the conversation about all this infrastructure over here can be used over here and probably really add more value, in fact, was an anathema discussion because of siloed thinking. But if you break all those silos down, what have I got in the cupboard? Where else can I use it?
Yeah, there's no avoiding the silos when you talk about customer experience in any business, is there? There's no avoiding the fact that you have to solve that problem of connecting. Some people talk about connecting silos, some talk about breaking them down. But anyway, something needs to happen with the silos. Well, that's a good way to end this particular episode, Liz. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where they're going to find you in the book?
You're going to find me on LinkedIn, Liz High. I think there's only one of me, so it should kind of come up easily. On Twitter, and the account is called Brand B4. That's letter B, number 4 Bank. And then we have a very conveniently named website, which is thinklikeabrandbook.com.
Splendid. Well, I'll include links to that in the show notes, of course. And I look forward to our next episode, which will be Think Like a Brand number 5. And we'll be talking about remembering that product isn't what it used to be. So I'm intrigued by that. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that. Good show. Well, I'll speak to you next week about your 4th principle. I'll see you then. So that's a wrap on the 4th episode of Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank, special for the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Liz for her insight, and to you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. I will include all the links to Liz and her book in the show notes, which you can find on your favourite podcast app or at rockstarcmo.com, where you can also find all our previous episodes. If you have any feedback or suggestions, spin the dial on the interwebs and say hello on the socials. We are Rockstar CMO just about everywhere. Email us at hello@rockstarcmo.com, or please leave a rating or review in your favourite podcast app. I'll be back with our usual show on Saturday with Jeff and Robert, when I'll also be talking to Todd Irwin, founder of the New York agency Phaser. Hope you'll again join us for that. Until then, enjoy the rest of your week. And thanks again for listening to Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.